I hate stopping something in the middle of doing it, especially when the reason you can't finish the job isn't even something you caused. Waiting for others can be one of the most painful parts of life, but it's gotta be done. You can only control so much after all. Stuck with an unfinished project, a job that should have been simple but wasn't. Either way, you've got to deal with it. As bad as it is, there is something worse, and it's pretty simple when you think about it. I think the only thing worse than one unfinished project is two. Two jobs paused in the middle, two cars bordering on undrivable. Sounds absolutely terrible, but as much as I try to avoid it, just having two broken cars was about to be the least of my concerns. Sometimes things happen all at once. This little bad luck spell started with a simple realization. I was gonna have to rely on the car that's given me the most trouble overall. Like that'll ever backfire. After all, this car never opportunistically brakes. I guess all that's really only a half-truth though. The E30 is still more than drivable, although it's kind of a pain to do so. Recently, it's been having a weird set of issues that were definitely not there until I swapped the rack. But the good thing is none of them are bad enough to the point where the car's not movable. They're just on the back of my mind. We'll just deal with them later. I mean, the pressing issue is the car that can't actually be moved, the S4, whose brake caliper is sitting in the back of the TT at the moment. Our kit sadly came with a bad caliper, so before I do anything, if I want to get this car movable, I need to talk to the people that we got it from. And that requires a phone call that I think could go a number of ways. Everybody gets to make mistakes, and that's just part of life. How you deal with those mistakes is what really matters. And that's all this caliper issue really is to me. A simple mistake that could have happened to anybody, but unfortunately happened to the people I bought the kit from. And how would they respond to it? Well, I could have seen it going a couple ways. Thankfully, they were relatively understanding. They were immediately accepting of the fact that the crossover tube came completely stripped, which was a little interesting, but I'm not going to read into it too much. They didn't, however, seem terribly excited to send me a new caliper right away though. Since it was custom made, according to them, it's going to take a number of weeks for them to actually get that to me. If they do it at all, that is. You see, they actually suggested how I should try and salvage the caliper first, out of pocket too. And then if what they suggested doesn't work, and the caliper is truly and actually broken, they'll start the process of making me a new one. Kind of a weird way to handle it, but it is what it is at the end of the day. That's how they're choosing to handle it. And on the one hand, since they're a small business, I definitely could see why they wouldn't want to just immediately send a caliper. Still a bit strange how they suggested fixing it though. But at least the parts to do it are local. All I've got to do is run to my local auto parts store, and allegedly they'll have everything I need to test out their fix. We won't really know if it works until we try it though. With the tools needed to potentially fix the S4 caliper, I decided I would take the E30 since I hadn't driven it in a couple days. And to be honest, I hadn't been driving it as much as normal due to a couple things. The car still needs its front alignment adjusted after we did the steering rack swap, and more than that, I think we need to do some troubleshooting for some steering related issues that definitely weren't there before. Either way, as I left it, the car definitely was drivable, so no sense in really letting it sit. Yet, as I went to leave, the car had other ideas. That's new. Maybe it's just a bit stuck. The parking brake is definitely off, but the car is refusing to move. Why now of all times though? This isn't even the issue this car was having before. The car moved just fine. I mean, I parked it here. Maybe I can break out of it with reverse. Who knows? At this point, I'll literally try anything. Yet, no matter what I tried, first, reverse, parking brake on, parking brake off, the car decided that it just wouldn't budge. In other words, it went from having an issue making it annoying to drive to being actually undrivable. What awesome luck. And then there was one One car of mine that's still drivable. At least there's that. And who knows? Maybe this fix they suggested for the S4 caliper might actually work. Either way, I'm going to need to go get some tools to at least try and get the E30 to move again. With whatever's wrong with it, that is. I'd at least like to get one of the two moving. There's nothing worse than relying on a car that's very rarely been reliable to you. And my TT happens to have a habit of braking at the worst possible times. I'm hoping it holds out for just a little bit longer though. Please tell me that wasn't what I thought it was. Oh. Huh. Yeah, that's first. Yeah, that's not supposed to be like that. Neutral. Third. Diagnosis complete. Looks like the replacement Diesel Geek first gear getter broke yet again. One car with 3 brake calipers, one car that thinks it's too good for moving, and now the TT no longer has access to 5th or 6th. Thank you, TT. Very cool. And the weirdest part about this whole situation is I've actually got higher priority issues at the moment. This car still moves. The others don't. So, it'll be a 4-speed for now. So what did Rotor Lab actually instruct me to do to these fancy calipers that I had custom built by them? Well, take hand tools to them, of course. While that's true on the surface, it's actually a little more than that. These calipers are actually pretty symmetrical, and the cool thing about that is you can swap the crossover tubes and the bleeder screws, and that basically flips the caliper upside down. So you would need to do that on both sides of the car and swap what side they're actually mounted on, and that at least gets the crossover tube threads to actually grab onto, which is all well and good, but it doesn't actually fix the issue we were running into. After all, on the other side, we still have a stripped hole that a bleeder screw needs to go into, and that's where the power tool suggestion of theirs comes in. Their instructions for this kit were to try and retap it with a parts store bleeder repair kit, and the one they suggested was by Dorman. The way these seal is also completely different since they use an NPT thread, so we got some taps too. I've got mixed feelings about this. The whole situation's just a bit strange to me. On the one hand, if this works and seals, I'll have a car to drive again. Great. But I also waited for these and saved for a long time. So to say that I'm not thrilled being told to drill into the calipers that I bought custom for the car would be a little bit of an understatement. At the end of the day, stuff like this can happen to anybody though. I feel like dealing with these kind of situations is one of the ways you can measure yourself as a person though. Sure, the situation's not the best. I paid for a caliper and I have to immediately drill an $8 fix into it. Yeah, that's one way I could look at it, but I could also just choose to focus on the good part of it. If this $8 fix actually gets me a car I can drive again, well that's a benefit in its own right, so I might as well see if it works. After all, they didn't explicitly say that they wouldn't send me a new one, they just said they wanted me to try this first. So I guess we can actually just start there. And with this piece in place, firmly gripping the new threads, I figured the best way to test it is to put it on the car. But since it doesn't have brakes, we're gonna have to work on it outside. It's a nice day at least. And the first step to get these brakes on the car is something I feel like we've done a million times at this point. Jack the car up, take the calipers off, switch them, and then put them back on. And once that's done, we'll be able to see if it holds fluid. And with this caliper off, left becomes right and right becomes left. We want the bleeder screws to be facing up, so we need to also switch this one. And thankfully, this caliper isn't missing its threads. So it's really just a simple game of changing places. And switching these actually falls in line with old school Porsche thinking. Doing it this way, the smallest piston is going to hit first, which is something a lot of people have different opinions on. Either way, switching these from side to side is definitely not going to hurt the braking performance of this car. These are still going to be a massive upgrade over what was already on there. And thankfully, since the mounts are symmetrical, the install is exactly the same. Just has to be repeated on both sides again. No better time to see if it holds fluid than now. And honestly, I have no real reason to think that it won't. Those bleeder fixes have been around for a long time, and most everyone will tell you that they work just fine. The real question is if we have any leaks and if we can get all the air out. Since the lines have been disconnected so long, this could be a very long process, and I'm expecting it will be. I also found an absolute steal on these small containers of Liqui brake fluid, so I've got about 30 of them, and it was somehow cheaper than buying 2 of their big jugs. Love the case sales. Since I don't have anybody to help me, I'm going to try to use this power bleeder to bleed the system. We've used it in the past on this car, and it worked pretty well. This car has never had a firm pedal feel. No matter how much I've bled it with this system, it's always felt like there was a little bit of dead travel before the brakes actually started. And that could be just air in the system, or it could have been the old brakes. This is going to be a great way to test that. I built some pressure up in the system, and then I went from caliper to caliper releasing the bleeder screw. The goal is to get rid of all the air in the line since air compresses. And you can see it through the form of bubbles. The more of these we get out, the better the pedal is going to feel, and the more the brakes will actually be able to stop. I'm doing this for all the calipers, starting with the one furthest away from the reservoir and then moving progressively closer. And from what I saw online for the Brembos, you need to bleed the inner screw first and then the outer. And the initial good news is that that bleeder fix isn't leaking at all. I can't see any fluid trying to come out of the threads, and you can bleed the new screw just like you would the old ones. So that's actually a really good sign. This might work out after all. I went through all 4 calipers 2 times initially. I found that bleeding the B5 can be a bit troublesome. Even if all the calipers look like they're pushing just fluid, sometimes air's hiding further up in the line. So what I usually do is once the car's running clear, I'll put all the wheels and everything back on and go for a quick test drive around the block or just pressing the brake a couple times to start forcing some of those bubbles closer to the calipers. And then I'll bleed the whole system once again. And ideally you shouldn't have to do this, but if the pedal is still squishy during that initial test drive, it's not a bad idea to try bleeding it again. Plus, it's always fun to see a car stopping under its own power again. It's been a while since I've driven this car, so I'm honestly quite excited. Hopefully this brake swap was actually worth it. The test drive, however, didn't go nearly as I had hoped. The car drove just like it did before, however, when I stepped on the brake, I noticed there was hardly any feedback. There was like 5 inches of dead travel, and then the last 2 inches resulted in the brakes actually working. So we've likely got a leak somewhere. And after checking all the wheels, I found the passenger rear feed line to actually be the culprit. Looks like that banjo bolt that connects to the caliper isn't actually as tight as it should be. But thankfully, that's a really easy fix. It just means we need to bleed the system again. And after doing that, I went for yet another test drive. I figured that had to have made it a little better, right? Well, this test drive didn't actually make it any further than the last. Quite a bit shorter, really. I drove the car about 3 feet before stepping on the brake, only to realize that it still felt like there was air in the system. But this time at least, the pedal had feedback the majority of the way. It was really only the top 2 to 3 inches of travel that didn't have much feedback at all. So, likely, more air in the system. And since I had so much fluid, I took the time to actually just replace almost all of it. I let each caliper run for a while until it was not only pushing no bubbles, but clear. And hopefully that helps a little bit. And to be fair, a good amount of the pedal squishiness could come from the pads themselves. New pads need to be bedded in, especially aggressive pads like the ones we have on the car. The only issue is there's 2 layers to the ones I bought. We've got to drive between 100 and 200 easy miles on the car with no aggressive braking to get rid of that first layer. And that's not going to happen in one day. But once it is done, we can actually bed in the pads and see if that makes any difference. For now though, the good news is the bleeding seemed to have helped quite a bit more. We do still have quite a bit of dead travel at the top of the pedal path, but it's now about the same as what it was before the swap, which is probably good enough to start getting those initial miles in. And I can already tell that this car is going to stop way harder. We've just got to stay the course and keep making improvements. At the end of the day, the S4 is now drivable. I just need to keep an eye out for leaks, triple check that there's no more bubbles, and start getting in those break-in miles. Then the real fun will start. But really, I'm just excited I can move the car again, which is a lot more than I can say for a certain E30 I know. The E30 chose just about the worst place to not move. Not only am I not allowed to work on the car according to my lease, but it's not exactly safe to do so even if I wanted to. And if having your cars regularly peered into and cased out wasn't enough, there's a number of people hanging around who like to borrow things permanently. So sitting out there for who knows how long with enough tools to take apart an entire brake system, yeah, that's something I'd like to avoid. Yet, here we are. I had to try and make this quick. My goal was to have everything out as little as possible. So right now, fixing the issue is a lot less important than getting the car actually moving. As soon as I can move the car, I can get it somewhere where I can actually work on it. And for starters, I know for a fact that it's a brake issue. Something in the rear brakes is completely seized. Right now, the parking brake is up and I can't move the wheel whatsoever. That makes complete sense. The parking brake isn't actually connected to the caliper on this car. It's almost like a little drum brake that sits inside the rotor itself. It basically spreads out and grabs the inside of the rotor. And the issue is that with the parking brake disconnected, the wheel still doesn't move. There's also absolutely no tension on the cable for the parking brake inside the car. So likely, we're gonna need to rebuild that. That's definitely part of the issue, but I don't think it's the whole story. This car lives outside, so the actual calipers themselves could have just froze in place. Not necessarily from the cold, but something could be rusty, like, I don't know, this rotor. I'd be surprised if that happened over the course of the week, but it's not impossible. So before I completely tore it apart, with the parking brake off, I decided to smack it with a hammer. And believe it or not, it actually helped. The combination of the hammer vibrations and the car wanting to roll forward seems to have broke free whatever seal was holding it in place. This didn't fix anything because it'll just happen again when the car sits, but if it's enough to get the car moving, we can take it somewhere where we can actually fix it. So to test my theory, I tried the exact same thing on the other side. After a little tapping, something definitely came free. The whole suspension decompressed. And it's wild that it had that much tension behind it to begin with. It was only sitting for like 5 days. Maybe this did the trick though. The car actually moved and I was thrilled. We didn't fix anything, but we got the car movable so that we can fix it. I'm not 100% sure what caused it yet, but I think rebuilding the parking brake and some new brake rotors front and rear would definitely not hurt. They were completely fine when we swapped pads, but maybe it's worth revisiting now. That was a lot more rust than I was expecting. As fast as we got the car moving was about as fast as I realized the bigger issue was still left untouched. The one this car had before it even got stuck. The following morning, I took the E30 for a longer drive. The main goal for today was to get the car somewhere where I could actually work on fixing all the issues that it's accumulated. Not just the issue with the sticking rear brakes, but the one that was here before. A much deeper rabbit hole regarding a steering issue that definitely wasn't here before we swapped racks. The E30 was having these issues before I even started the S4 brakes. Then again, those brakes were supposed to be a simple bolt-on. Hence why I decided to start them to begin with. But look where that got me. Guess not all claims are entirely true. The good news, however, is right now I'm kind of back where I was. The cycle has completely started over. All 3 cars still have their long lists of to-dos, some with higher priority than others. I'm gonna talk with Rotor Lab about the S4 caliper again and see what they say. At the best, they send me a better looking one, and at the worst, it does work. We just need to actually bed in the pads. The TT also has a number of maintenance items on its list. Not just the shifter, that car likes to brake and more things are broken. But even that's lower priority than the issues I'm having with the E30. I feel like right now I'm in the same situation I was before, but the pieces are different. Jumbled around. History likes to repeat itself, and I find myself often stuck in that repetition. And it's those exact repetitive moments where stepping back is just so important. It's so easy to get fixated on all the bad things that happen. Spells of bad luck, projects left unfinished, things don't go your way, getting ripped off, bad weather. The list of bad things is endless, but maybe that's because you're only looking for bad. If you convince yourself the world's out to get you, that's exactly what you're gonna find. At the end of the day, it's all perspective, so maybe you shouldn't look for bad to begin with. Maybe, in spite of everything bad that's around you, you should look for the good moments. Life is always going to go on, through bad and through good. So maybe there really is no sense in letting the bad things bother you. Might as well take a step back and try to find a good response to a bad situation. There's a lot more important things to worry about out there. Thank you so much for watching. if you enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like and subscribing for more. That's the best way you can help support me and my content. Either way, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.